Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome you all to this distinguished panel on the role of the development finance institutions in achieving the SDGs, the specific case of Islamic finance. Over recent years, Islamic finance has been growing in importance, including in the non-Muslim world. According to a 2016 joint World Bank and Islamic Development Bank report, global Islamic finance now represents almost $2 trillion in assets. This trend is not surprising, as Islamic financial products have shown great potential to promote sustainable development on many fronts. First, Islamic finance products have helped further social development. Solidarity-based Islamic finance mechanisms like zakat and waqf have played an important role in promoting additional financial resources for the poor. Second, Islamic finance promotes financial inclusion. Given the significant and growing share of the Muslim population in the world, Islamic finance will continue to play an important role by providing customized financial services for this segment of the global population. Third, Islamic finance contributes to financial stability. It has demonstrated remarkable resilience during the economic and financial crisis. Especially its fundamental principles of sharing risk and building long-term relationships between individuals and financial institutions facilitate a sound connection between the financial sector and the real economy. Considering some negative features of financialization that was played in the run-up to the most recent world financial and economic crisis, Islamic finance can therefore make a significant contribution in a more stable, inclusive, and development-oriented international financial systems. Fourth, Islamic finance can help fill the enormous infrastructure financing gap at the global, regional, and national levels. For example, sukuks, often called Islamic bonds, can generate large amount of money for infrastructure investment and simultaneously promote greater links between the financial sector and the real economy. Despite these important features of Islamic finance, the full potential of its products has not yet been utilized, sometimes for questionable political reasons. Islamic finance products should be considered by non-Muslim providers and users where they are competitive and offer positive externalities in promoting sustainable development. Today's discussion should explore how we can promote Islamic finance and maximize its potential to help mobilize resources for the implementation of the SDGs, especially in the context of large-scale infrastructure investments. Let us discuss how we can arrive at a stable and predictable regulatory frameworks that promote the development of Islamic capital markets. Let us find ways to encourage Islamic finance providers to take into account the SDGs as investment criteria. And let us explore how multilateral and regional development banks can more effectively support the Islamic finance industry through capacity building and experience sharing. I look forward to today's discussion and encourage all of us to use our limited time to focus on concrete and actionable policy recommendations on how the international community can fully harness the potential of Islamic finance in implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This concludes my brief opening remarks, and I am now pleased to invite His Excellency Dr. Ahmed bin Mohammed Al Mouraki, Secretary General Special Envoy for Humanitarian Affairs, to deliver the keynote speech. Dr. Mouraki, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I will conduct my speech in Arabic, so if you wish to put your headset. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أصحاب السعادة، السيدات والسادة، في البداية اسمحوا لي أن أتقدم بالشكر والتقدير لدولة قطر لاستضافة هذا المؤتمر الهام، كما أشكر المنظمين على الدعوة الكريمة للمشاركة في هذه الجلسة. تأتي أهمية هذا المؤتمر أنه يسعى إلى مناقشة تحديات التمويل التي تواجه تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة، وذلك بواسطة الأطر والنظم الوطنية المعنية بذلك. الحضور الكريم، لا يخفى عليكم أن القمة الإنسانية العالمية أشارت عن الانقسام القائم بين العمل الإنساني والإنمائي، وهذا الانقسام انقسام في الخطط وانقسام كذلك في الفاعلين. فنجد أن هناك جهازاً يعنى بالتنمية وآخر يعنى بالشؤون الإنسانية. وعلى الرغم أن الدول تقدم مساعدات إنسانية عند حدوث الأزمات، ألا أن هذه المساعدات ما تلبث أن تتوقف قبل أن تنتهي الأزمة، وذلك لأن كثير من المساعدات الإنسانية لا يوجد فيها البعد التنموي. وإذا أردنا أن يكون هناك تمويل للتنمية دون تمويل للأزمات الممتدة، فقد يؤخر هذا أهداف التنمية المستدامة. لذا أرى في حال لم يتم تحقيق الأهداف الإنسانية العاجلة التي هي أمامنا، فسيكون هناك أعمال كثيرة غير منجزة. ونعطي مثالاً على ذلك. نجد أنه تم القضاء على شلل الأطفال في سوريا قبل عدة سنوات، ألا أنه نجد أن شلل الأطفال قد عاود بالظهور مجدداً أثناء الأزمة، وذلك نتيجة لانهيار النظام الصحي. كما أن لدينا في المنطقة العربية كثير من اللاجئين الذين لم يتم إدخالهم في المنظومة التعليمية، ووجود هؤلاء اللاجئين في عدد من الدول تعاني بالأصل اقتصادياتها من تحديات كبيرة، مما يشكل عبئاً من توفير الخدمات الأساسية وفرص العمل لمواطنيها فضلاً عن اللاجئين. والذي أقصده هنا أن استمرار هذه الأزمات في المنطقة وخاصة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا وحلها حلاً سياسياً، ذلك سوف يؤدي إلى تأخر بشكل كبير في تنفيذ أهداف التنمية المستدامة، وذلك لأن التمويل سوف يتوجه إلى جهود إعادة الأعمار بشكل رئيسي. الحضور الكريم، هذا يضعنا أمام تحديات كبيرة، وقد نلتقي مرة أخرى لإعادة النقاش حول نفس الموضوع في هذه القضايا ما لم يتم حلها بشكل جذري. لذلك المطلوب أن نفكر بطرق وأساليب جديدة ومبتكرة. وقد تطرقت القمة الإنسانية العالمية إلى ما يسمى بالصفقة الكبرى أو الجراند بارجن، كما أشير هنا إلى زيارتي المشتركة للصومال مع البنك الدولي وكذلك البنك الأفريقي، وقد خرجنا بأهمية التقارب ما بين العمل الإنساني والتنموي منذ اللحظات الأولى لحدوث الأزمات، ووضع الحلول المبتكرة التي تربط بين الإنسان والإنمائي. وفي السياق نفسه إن تمكين المجتمعات المحلية في الاستجابات للتحديات الإنسانية والتنموية، وبالأخص في المجتمعات ذات الهشاشة العالية والأزمات الممتدة، سوف يكون له الأثر الكبير في تحقيق الفاعلية والاستدامة. وعليه أن نفكر في بناء القدرات المحلية في ظل تناقض أو تناقص الموارد المالية التقليدية. كما يجب أن نفكر خارج الصندوق، حيث توجد في العديد من المجتمعات في الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا بشكل خاص والعالم بشكل عام موارد مالية غير تقليدية، مثل التمويل الإسلامي الاجتماعي، الزكاة، الأوقاف، ولكن كيف يمكن وضعها في إطار تحقيق التنمية المستدامة. وهذا يتطلب من صناع السياسات في المنطقة حول إفساح المجال لتقنين وتنظيم هذه الصيغ والنماذج ضمن الفضاء العام بما تخدم ويحقق التوجهات والأهداف الوطنية، وأن تتمكن الأطر والنظم من تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة وفتح الحوار مع مؤسسات الاقتصاد الإسلامي الاجتماعي لتوجيه قدراتها في خدمة الصالح العام. في نهاية حديثي أتمنى أني قد أثرت أمام الحضور الكريم عدة تحديات وقضايا، وتناولت بعض الحلول التي يمكن أن تساهم في تهيئة الأرضية الملائمة لتحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة، لا سيما الربط بين السياق الإنمائي والإنساني وتفعيل النماذج والصيغ المالية غير التقليدية مثل الاقتصاد الاجتماعي الإسلامي. وأتمنى النجاح لهذه الجلسة، وأجدد لكم شكري وتقديري، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
I wish to thank His Excellency Dr. Ahmed bin Mohammed Al Muraki, the Secretary General Special Envoy for Humanitarian Affairs, for his inspiring keynote speech. And the next point in our program is the presentation by Dr. Habib Ahmed, Professor and Sharia Chair in Islamic Law and Finance, Durham University Business School. Professor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Like everyone else, I would start by thanking UNDESA and State of Qatar for organizing this very useful event. And I also want to thank them to have a session on Islamic finance. Going to the topic, this presentation is to look at the contribution of Islamic finance in terms of how it can help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. When we talk about the financial sector, we can think of two ways in which the financial sector can affect development. One is in terms of financial inclusion, and the other is to look at the ways in which the financial sector can affect infrastructure development. The focus of my presentation is to look at ways in which Islamic finance can contribute to infrastructure development. Now, before I go to the Islamic finance part, just a few slides on the background. This slide shows the gaps which need to be filled to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. This is taken from McKinsey study 2016. And as you see that the gaps are huge. It can range from $2.6 trillion per year to $3.4 trillion depending on the assumptions. Now, to fill this gap, the ways which has been identified, among others, in the Addis Ababa agenda are to look at the various sources of financing. This includes public, private versus domestic and international. Now, Islamic finance can play a part in all of these dimensions, but the focus of my presentation will be to look at the domestic and private dimension of Islamic finance. To have a perspective of the need for Islamic finance, I have some information in terms of the needs and the status of SDGs in some selected Organization of Islamic Cooperation member countries. As we see on the left, these are SDG indices of 44 OIC member countries compared to the highest scoring countries versus the lowest scoring countries. Now, this SDG index has the maximum of 100 and a minimum of 0. So we see that the overall average of the OIC member countries is 50.1, which basically implies that there's a huge need for investments in the SDGs in member countries. On the right, we have some selected countries which shows the needs for investment in terms of attaining sustainable infrastructure. And we see that in countries like Bangladesh, for the next 13 years, 129 billion US dollars worth of investment would be needed. In Nigeria, this amount is $283 billion. So the investments needs are very large. And the question is, what is the role of Islamic finance in this framework? The issue about Islamic finance is actually about financial inclusion, and the development perspective of Islamic finance is that there's a large segment of the population which does not engage with financial sector because of cultural and religious reasons. And there are some studies, for example, a CGAP study shows that in different countries, 20 to 40% of the population do not engage with conventional finance because of religious convictions. And similarly, another study by World Bank from 5 countries showed that 45% of 5,000 respondents, they prefer Islamic finance. And the preference was to the extent that they said they are willing to pay 5% more in terms of costs, but they would prefer Islamic finance compared to conventional finance. So when we talk about Islamic finance, it becomes a financial inclusion issue at the micro level and actually development issue at the macro level. So now moving on to Islamic finance itself, I'll just provide some basic information on the principles and contracts used in Islamic finance before going into ways in which the sector can contribute to sustainable development goals and infrastructure financing specifically. Now, the overall goal of Sharia, the ethical or the moral objective is to enhance welfare and prevent harm. Within this moral overlay and perspective, there are certain legal principles which must be fulfilled. The basic principle of Islamic commercial law is that of permissibility, which basically states that everything is permissible except things which are explicitly prohibited in Sharia. And among the prohibitions, of course, there are some activities like gambling and some products like alcohol and pork, but there are some contractual prohibitions, and these can be categorized broadly under what we call riba and horror. Now, riba is basically literally means increase and usually translated as interest, but it is actually has more implications, broader implications than that. And for example, sale of debt would fall under riba, and as such, under Islamic financial principles, sale of debt is not allowed. When it comes to horror, horror is basically translated as legal ambiguity or excessive risk. And the principles of horror prohibits the use of conventional derivatives. Now, since interest-based contracts are prohibited, the way Islamic banks and Islamic finance provide services, it uses the permissible contracts in structuring the products. And the permissible contracts are classified at different, like it's sale-based contracts which create debt. Then you have asset-based contracts, which are basically leasing contracts. Then you have equity-based contracts, which are partnership contracts. And then the agency-based contracts, which are wakala. So most of the Islamic banks will use one of these contracts to structure their products. And then, of course, there are supporting contracts which are also used to complement these key contracts. The Islamic financial sector has grown significantly. As was mentioned, its value is close to $2 trillion in 2016. But we see that bulk of the Islamic finance assets are in the Islamic banking sector. Close to 73% of the Islamic financial assets are banking assets. When we look at the sukuk, which is basically Islamic bonds, they constitute the second important part. 17% of the assets are in Islamic bonds. And the non-banking financial sector, as we see, is very underdeveloped. And if you look at the takaful and re-takaful assets, which are basically the insurance sector, it is only close to 2% of the total assets. So the banking sector has developed, but the non-banking sector and also the capital markets segment of this industry has not developed to that extent. Now coming to how the role Islamic finance can play in supporting the SDGs in general and the infrastructure investments in particular. If you look at the social and ethical values and principles of Islamic finance, there's a direct link to these social and real economy-related projects. So the ethos of Islamic finance are in compliance with investment in infrastructure projects. Now, what I'm going to do in the next few slides is to look at some case studies of how banks, non-bank financial institutions, and the financial markets have contributed to the development of infrastructure projects. First, looking at the banks, Islamic banks, even though it constitutes the largest segment, individually they were very small, so their contribution to infrastructure is usually in very small tranches. Now, as the industry is growing and the bank size are growing, we see some cases where some infrastructure projects have been wholly financed by Islamic banks. And a couple of examples are, one is the Dorele container terminal in Djibouti. It was a $422 million project, wholly financed by Islamic banking syndication. And the other example is the airport at Medina in Saudi Arabia. It is a larger project of $1.14 billion US dollars, fully funded by Islamic banking syndication. Now, when it comes to non-bank financial institutions, as I have mentioned, it is one of the underdeveloped sectors of Islamic finance. Now, in conventional finance, we see that the pension funds, the insurance funds, they play a very important role in funding and financing infrastructure projects. Now, because of the small size of the non-bank financial institutions in Islamic finance, their contribution to infrastructure projects have been very small. We don't see actually too much activity in terms of the insurance, takaful sector, and the pension funds. Actually, Islamic pension funds are almost non-existent. So this is an area where there is need for growth. When it comes to sukuk, the Islamic bonds, this shows the figure here shows the contribution of sukuk in terms of the different sectors. If you look at the infrastructure sector, I think they account close to 17% of the total funding. So even though sukuk is a very popular instrument, when it comes to financing the infrastructure sector, their contribution is relatively modest. Some case studies where sukuk has been issued to finance projects include the Neelam Jhelum sukuk in Pakistan. 100 billion rupees was raised to finance this project. And the interesting thing is, as you see it, because it's in rupees, most of the funding was raised domestically. Then we have the Dana Infra Retail Sukuk in Malaysia, which funded the MRT project in Kuala Lumpur. It was a $2.5 billion, ringgit sukuk which was issued. And the interesting feature of this sukuk was that it is a retail sukuk. So the value of the sukuk was only 100 ringgit, which is close to 25 US dollars. And so individuals could buy into this sukuk to fund this project. And finally, we have another example from Malaysia, where an expressway was funded, raising funds of 1 billion. Again, all these three examples show that the resource mobilization was domestic, and in one case, the resource mobilization was from retail investors. Now, there have been some recent developments in terms of sustainable infrastructure financing by Islamic Finance. And I have here a couple of examples. One is the Islamic banks. They funded the Master Wind Energy Limited. It's a wind farm, basically, wind turbines. Three Islamic banks, they contributed to $50 million in this project. And then we have a Khazana SRI Sukuk, the first SRI Sukuk, which was issued recently, actually, in Malaysia. The returns were based on whether the project met certain KPIs. And then finally, there's an example of Islamic social finance, a waqf or Islamic endowment, again in Malaysia, where it funded some clinics and a hospital to provide medical services to the poorer sections of the population. Now, in the end, some recommendations. As we have heard during this conference, coming up with a national SDG strategy is very important to achieve the SDGs. And we have heard that a lot of countries are actually incorporating this strategy into the development strategies. Now, within this strategy, there has to be an infrastructure plan and also an accompanying financial plan. And when it comes to Islamic finance, the way to move forward is in countries where Islamic financial sector is significant, there's a need to incorporate the role of Islamic finance in these financial plans related to infrastructure development. The second issue is the legal and regulatory framework. We all know that financial contracts are legally constructed, and if the legal and regulatory framework is not favorable, it's very difficult for the industry to operate. In some countries, we see the government is proactively changing the laws and regulations to accommodate Islamic finance, but in a lot of other countries, this is lacking. It's not only the financial laws which need to be changed, there are issues about the tax laws. Because Islamic finance is asset-based and equity-based, there are tax implications. So there is a need to change the tax laws so that the Islamic financial sector and the conventional sector are at the same level playing field. Then public-private partnerships. This is new, something new in most developing countries and countries where Islamic finance operate. And there are some Sharia issues when it comes to public-private partnership in terms of the concession laws, in terms of ownership rights and obligations. So there is a need to come up with a framework of concession laws and also a framework for standardizing the public-private partnership financing structures which are Sharia compliant. At the financial sector level, we need some development in the capital markets. As we have seen, capital market development is actually concentrated in a few countries. In a lot of countries, even though the Islamic banking sector is large, the capital market, Islamic capital market, is almost non-existent. A case, for example, in Bangladesh, almost 25% of the banking sector is Islamic, but the capital market is almost zero. So there is a need to develop the capital market so that the sukuk and other instruments can be used to raise funds for infrastructure investments. And there are some other issues in the paper. I have discussed this. For example, there's a need for Sharia agreement. Without a national Sharia governance framework, most of the Sharia issues are determined at the bank level, and this can create diversity of views and diversity of products, which creates legal uncertainty. So there are some of these issues which need to be dealt with. When it comes to financial institutions, we see that the banking sector is growing, but the non-banking sector, especially when you talk about takaful and pension funds and other non-bank financial institutions, they're still a very small part of the sector, and there is a need to actually expand this sector And one of the ways this can be done is, again, to provide a enabling legal and regulatory framework. At the products level, infrastructure is actually a product which suits the values and principles of Islamic finance. But if there are no products developed, the investors cannot invest. And I think one of the things which we have learned in the morning sessions is, even though there's funds available, if there are no products through which investors can invest, then the investment doesn't take place. The other issue is that the products have to integrate the ESG-related issues. Now, even though in Islamic finance we talk about social and ethical values, we see that in practice, ESG-related issues are not embedded in the products. So there is a need to embed the ESG-related dimensions into the products. There are some cases in terms of risk-sharing investment accounts, which relates to the Basel-related regulatory requirements, which discourages investment in long-term and infrastructure projects. So one way to get around this is to have risk-sharing investment accounts. And in Malaysia, actually, the recent IFSA, which is Islamic Financial Services Act, it separates the investment accounts with the deposits. And for the investment accounts, the banks do not have to hold the same regulatory capital if they invest in projects like infrastructure. And the other issue about the products is tradable and liquid sukuk structures. Now, if a sukuk is structured as a debt, it is not tradable. So if the sukuk have to be traded, these structures have to be equity-based or asset-based. The last recommendations relate to the role of multilateral organizations. Of course, we know that multilateral development banks like World Bank and Islamic Development Bank, most of the financing goes into infrastructure projects. Islamic Development Bank has also established infrastructure funds, one of them with Asian Development Bank. But the other role which not only Islamic Development Bank, but organizations like United Nations can play is to build capacity and human capital for this very important sector. Now, infrastructure investment is something new for the industry, and these multilateral development banks have experience in them, and they can transfer this expertise and knowledge to the industry through technical assistance programs. Finally, I think one of the key things that need to be changed is the conceptual outlook and mindset. First change is that we move from just focusing on the financial due diligence to incorporate ESG-related issues when we are looking at projects. The second move in terms of mindset change is to move from short-term to long-term investment. And finally, the third move, which is very specific to Islamic finance, is to move from the very narrow legalistic perspective of banking and finance to incorporate the broader goals of Sharia, which basically are about increasing welfare and diminishing the harms. Thank you very much.
I wish to thank Professor Ahmed for his very informative, well-structured, and comprehensive presentation. And as we move forward with this session, I am pleased now to ask my colleague and long-term friend, Mr. Michael O'Neill, Assistant Secretary General and Director of External Relations of the United Nations Development Program, to assume the role of the moderator and conduct our business from now on. Michael, you are in charge.
Thank you very much, Alexander, and let me join others in thanking the State of Qatar and UNDESA for co-hosting this conference. And I'd particularly like to thank Her Excellency Sheikha Ali Al Thani, Permanent Representative of the State of Qatar to the UN in New York, and through her, the Government of Qatar, for their hospitality for all of us here over the last few days. And I'm also pleased to join this panel on this important topic for all of us involved in the pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals, which actually is every one of us in different ways. But a key challenge, as has already been set out throughout these 2 days, and certainly by the previous speakers, is how do we secure the financing needed for this enormously ambitious agenda. And for all of us working in the United Nations and international financial institutions, our focus is increasingly moving from funding to financing. And for UNDP, for example, that means a key part of our work is how do we support countries to raise the financing they need from a variety of sources, public, domestic, public international, private, and within that, clearly, the role of Islamic finance is growing rapidly, and we need to find ways to unlock further the potential that it offers. And if I may just offer a couple of points on that before introducing the panelists. Others have already said there is a gap of at least $2.5 trillion a year, perhaps more, if we are to achieve the investment needed for the Sustainable Development Goals. And at the same time, we can see on the one hand, there is around $250 trillion in private wealth in the global capital markets. So just 1% of that would come close to matching the gap. And meanwhile, Islamic finance is growing exponentially from $200 billion in 2003 to around $2 trillion in 2015, and likely to reach $3 trillion in the next 3 years. And impact investing from both Islamic and conventional sources could also reach around $1 trillion by 2020. So I think a key question we must face is how can we find ways not just of unlocking, but also blending these different sources of finance. And there should be a natural fit, both with Islamic finance as well as impact investing, for the pursuit of the SDGs, given the strong tradition of charitable giving and philanthropy that underpins Islamic finance, the notion of shared prosperity as well as shared risk, so financial inclusion, as Dr. Ahmed has already set out. So in the UN, different agencies are already working to address these challenges, and UNHCR this year has conducted a Zakat crowdfunding campaign to provide assistance for Syrian refugees. Similar examples could be replicated across the Islamic world, from the Philippines to Palestine, Sudan to Suriname and elsewhere. UNDP this year has begun partnering with Basnat in Indonesia. Basnat is the national Zakat collection body to apply Zakat funds for pursuit of the SDGs at local level. For example, to help provide renewable energy for rural communities in Jambi province in Suriname. UNDP is also partnering with the Islamic Development Bank, and I hope we'll hear more about that shortly, with a global Islamic finance and impact investing platform to promote market-based solutions, for example, to enable blending of Islamic finance with other private sector resources. So I will leave it to others to speak more about that. So we hope that our two panelists and anybody on the podium who would like to join in can help us to address three questions around lessons, challenges and next steps. Specifically, what lessons can Islamic finance teach us for the financing of the 2030 agenda? Secondly, what challenges do we need to overcome if this is to be achieved, to maximize the contribution of Islamic finance for the Sustainable Development Goals? And thirdly, what specific steps and policies can be pursued in order to achieve that? So to address those questions, I'm going to invite first Mr. Nedzad Ayanovic, Senior Partnership Specialist at the Islamic Development Bank, to offer us his remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nedzad Ayanovic. I'm a senior partnership specialist at the Islamic Development Bank, and I'm the focal point for the United Nations, as well as for Asian Development Bank, and also European Commission. So my presentation will be divided into 3 parts. Before that, I would like to thank the organizer, State of Qatar, as well as the United Nations for giving the opportunity for Islamic Development Bank to speak at this important conference. So as I said, the presentation will be divided into 3 parts. The first part would be Islamic Development Bank Group at a glance. And then the next part will be sort of the relationship that Islamic Finance has with the Sustainable Development Goals. And finally, I would like to give a case study of Lives and Livelihood Fund, which is more of an innovative fund which we have recently developed. So this slide basically explains the journey of Islamic Development Bank Group. The bank was founded in 1975, so this year we are into our 42nd year. But I just want to make sure that the audience understands that besides the bank, we also have other entities working as similarly as the World Bank Group. So we have a think tank, which is called IRTI, responsible for research and training in Islamic finance. This institute was founded in 1981. In 1994, we have an entity dealing with insurance of investment and export credit. ICD was founded in 1999, and it deals with private sector development. In 2008, we have founded Islamic Trade Finance Corporation. And most recently, in 2015, we have developed an entity that is developed to support poor programs in our 57 member countries. We are a unique multilateral development bank in the sense we are sort of a mixture between the regional banks as well as the World Bank, because in Latin America we have 2 member countries, Suriname and Guyana, and as you can see across 4 continents, we are as far east as Indonesia. We have 1,100 staff, mostly at the headquarters in Jeddah, but right now we have 4 regional offices, one in Kazakhstan, one in Malaysia, one in Morocco, and one in Senegal. And most recently, we have opened offices in Turkey and Indonesia. During the reform process, which have been initiated by our president this year, we expect to have 12 hubs, which are going to cover our 57 member countries. And the first hub within the next few months will be opened in Bangladesh, as well as in Egypt. This is our operations plan for 2017. And as you can see from this operations plan, we see planned activities on projects in the amount of approximately $5 billion US. Now, you will also notice in this slide that under ordinary terms, which are mostly used for infrastructure type of projects, there are about 92% of financing. And for concessional financing, which supports sectors such as education and health, we only have $423 million. And keeping in mind that 25 out of 57 member countries are least developed countries. This is not really enough money to carry out a comprehensive support in the sustainable development agenda. In this slide, I just want to make sort of some comparison to Islamic finance and sustainable development goals by just reminding everybody on sort of a definition of sustainable development, which integrates economic development with social inclusion and environmental sustainability. Furthermore, it sort of considers the present and future development and encompasses morality to save humanity in the long run. We feel that there are 4 areas for financing in sustainable development, for sustainable development goals. One is that MDBs will have to take more of a convening role on not only providing financial resources, but also providing capacity development and technical assistance. We also note that investment flows will have to come more from the private sector sources. And there is a need to do resource mobilization at the domestic resources. And we have to look at ways to blend the official development assistance with other private sources or any other funding sources. As you know, there are some challenges with the existing financial system, and one of those challenges is a major cause of unsustainability and unsustainable debt. With compounded interest, debt grows beyond real wealth. It imposes great pressure on natural resources, encouraging quick profit-driven choices over sustainable decisions. And finally, recurrent financial crises prolong inequality, prolong poverty, and misallocation of resources. Professor Habib has mentioned, the overview of the Islamic financial services in his presentation, but I just want to indicate, maybe just touch upon a couple of points, and that's that 25% of the population of the world are the potential customers of Islamic financial systems. Furthermore, presently there are approximately 70 million customers of Islamic financial sector, and the return of assets as well as the average return on equity are pretty good. And there are the percentages. There are about 92 countries where there is Islamic financial windows available. This slide indicates that Islamic finance is a comprehensive system for a society. We have mapped the level of population in any society, and we have indicated that, from corporate companies to high net worth of individuals, all the way to the most economically disadvantaged population, there are Islamic financial services ecosystem that could be accessed. For the more higher-end net worth individuals, there are Islamic financial institutions, small and medium enterprises that could engage in sukuk investment equity funding. And for the economically disadvantaged, there are mechanisms such as zakat and awqaf, which can be supported for this population. And in this case, there is a possibility of reducing the gap in the level of income. Professor Habib has already mentioned what is Islamic finance, so I won't repeat, but what is very important to know that it's a principle where the risks are shared, and you know, when people go into Islamic financial scheme, they share risks, which means that, you know, in case of profits, profit is shared. In case of loss, loss is shared. And also that all the financial activities are tightly integrated into real economic activities. We have touched on the principles. And maybe the point here to mention that Islamic finance is a financial system towards ethical business and social responsible finance. So what can Islamic finance bring towards SDGs? Islamic finance possesses fair and equitable tools for risk appetite and allocation. It further possesses effective instrument to promote domestic resources mobilization, and it enables social welfare tools to leverage concessional finance. It is important to stress that Islamic finance is a form of financial intermediation in accordance with the moral and social preference of a society. Now, when we look at the SDG, the 17 of them, and when we look at on left hand what the IDB group mission priorities are, and what IDB group member countries' priorities are, we will see that the SDGs, sort of the mission of IDB, SDGs, and the priorities of the member countries could be divided and put into sections that are relevant. In the next slide, we have also divided the role of Islamic finance in supporting the SDGs into three areas: finance for social development, financing for infrastructure development, and financing innovation to effective efficiency. And then in this slide, we have managed to divide them into different categories, where we see that financing for infrastructure development, there are 8 SDGs that could be covered under that. And the Islamic financial mechanisms include Sukuk program, Islamic syndication financing. On the financial for social development, there are 6 SDGs also indicated here, and the Islamic finance mechanism is divided into Zakat, Waqaf, Islamic microfinance. These are mostly for human development support, which includes education and health primarily for us. And then finally, in the category of financing to promote innovative and achievable efficiency, there are 6 SDGs. And in here, Islamic finance mechanism is equity-based structure and more sustainable in promoting innovative innovations such as Islamic private equity, Islamic venture capital, and equity funds crowdfunding. So this slide finalizes that Islamic finance is able to address sustainable development initiatives, and Triangle sees that economic infrastructure together with the private sector development and inclusive social development are all parts of the Islamic finance. And if you allow me just the last 2-3 minutes to say about Lives and Livelihood Fund, which is our innovative program, which we have initially developed with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on polio eradication in Pakistan. The idea was that the Gates Foundation wanted to engage on polio eradication in Pakistan, but they realized that the amount of funding and the amount of support from the government institutions needed to be much higher than they could sort of afford. So a meeting was held between the government of Pakistan, Islamic Development Bank, and the foundation. And it was agreed that the Pakistan government would take a no-interest loan in the amount of $220 million US, and where Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation would contribute to the markup. So over a period of approximately 7 years, once the polio program is implemented, the government of Pakistan would sort of pay back the total amount, but the markup, which would be the markup for the bank, would be coming from the foundation. This worked out very well, and the two parties said, well, if it worked out well on polio eradication in Pakistan, why don't we try to do it in the least developed countries? And so the foundation, together with IDB, approached the Gulf donors, and IDB put forward $100 million US, whereas the foundation said we will put up to 100 million if we can achieve the total amount of 500 million. The Qatar Development Fund put 50 million, and the King Salman Foundation put 100 million, and the Abu Dhabi Fund for Development put 50. So in a way, what this allows is the ordinary funds of the bank, which you saw is about 90% of our overall funding, could be blended together with grant resources, and over a period of 5 years, we would be able to get very concessional terms for many of the projects in our least developed countries. The sectors that are involved are health, agriculture, and basic infrastructure. And as you can see, these are the 25 of the least developed countries in our member states, as well as some of the non-least developed countries, such as Egypt and Morocco, are also eligible for a smaller amount. And to finalize, this slide indicates all the projects that have been funded so far. It indicates the total project cost, also the contribution from the government, contribution from under ordinary terms, as well as from contributions from the LLF financing. So this has been able to sort of leverage the amount of funding that the IDB can use for the concessional terms for the areas of agriculture, health, and education. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much to Nedzad, and I'm conscious time is pressing on. I hope we'll have a few minutes at the end for questions to the panelists. So next I invite Marco Lichtfuß, a partner with Deloitte, to come and offer his remarks.
Hello, everybody. I'll try and not repeat too much of what's been said, because the issues are well known, etc. Maybe just one of the things that, for the less familiar with Islamic finance and its principles and concepts, so basically, as we've seen, it's not only grown in terms of size, but what's important to know as well, it's grown in terms of the products it offers over time, and it is now quite diversified in terms of the products it offers. Although it covers a large chunk of the population, geographically speaking, it is still a bit underdeveloped in some regions. And one of my pet things in this is that Islamic finance has very well penetrated the institutional investment sector, etc., and high net worth individuals, but it has still lacking in a lot of ways in the retail sector, and especially in those regions where the majority of the population is not Muslim, but there's definitely a need for it. Now, why am I so enthusiastic about Islamic finance? Well, we saw this morning that one of the problems we have is to generate funding for SDG-related, ESG-related investments. And the problem in that is that the way conventional finance works, and we heard it from our speaker before from Stanford, is purely driven by returns. And that's the only thing that the famous Wall Street and everybody looks at today, and this is how we all go about it. So why does Islamic finance? To my way, it's the way forward. Why? Because it's in the DNA of Islamic finance to support SDG, ESG type of goals. That's what it is about, in different ways. In a primary way, in terms of how it invests. In a secondary way, that it is all about asset-backed, about real assets, about only investing in things that really drive the economy, have an impact, etc. And a third way, by way of what's zakat and waqf, which is basically a redistribution of profits and of net assets to the needy population. So we have everything in the structure in here that we need to have a positive impact on it. And then not only that, it is also very much, if you look at the type of products that are out there, the type of products Islamic finance offers are really aligned with achieving all the goals that we have in the SDGs and ESG. It was mentioned before that that needs to be made more explicit, but it's in it. It's just not explicitly in the product descriptions and in the governance. So that is where we see that all the instruments are there. So why hasn't Islamic finance really progressed more than this? Well, there's a few issues, and I'll skip over this, you can read it through it afterwards, that are in three main areas. One is the policy framework. Now, I was a consultant, a regulator, back to being a consultant. I was a member of the Basel Committee at some point in my life, and one of the problems that Islamic finance is facing today is that the regulation of banking and financial institutions as it is driven today, if you look at a bank is generally speaking, you have an isolated liability side, you have a big, big wall, and then you have an asset side, and once money gets into the bank, it's the banks, and the bank takes all the risks and invests it. And that way of supervising the banks and encouraging it doesn't fit Islamic finance, which is a participatory, so more like an asset management type of proposition where we invest the person's money, that's the investment type, you're the investor, we invest your money, but we only take commissions and fees. Islamic finance is in between the two. We share the investment, we share the risks in it, we share the returns in it, and we only allocate these assets, so to speak, to what I would call very much 100% SDG and ESG compatible investments. And that is not accounted for in the Basel rules today, and that creates all kinds of problems. And some of these problems are how to reconcile these two. Some of that is about what kind of products you can really offer, how you can manufacture your products, you can structure them. It also entails that there are higher costs often to be borne by Islamic finance institutions and banks in particular vis-a-vis other conventional banks. Then the markets are not aligned to offering these products. There is some inherent problems with Islamic finance in that the way it is today, the liquidity in the market and the diversity of maturities that are available in these products is relatively limited. So that is something we need to address. And then there's finally, so we have what the policy framework can do, what the governments can do, the institutions can do around it. We have a bit what the markets can do about promoting Islamic finance. And then finally we have, and that's the lower green boxes, is what can Islamic finance do to be more attractive, more well-known, etc. And there, I would really try and focus today, because we covered a lot of the other two issues, and you will find that there is nothing new under the sun. We all talk about the same things here that need to be done. So I will try and address a bit more what Islamic finance really can do in order to broaden its appeal, because I think Islamic finance is not just for Muslims, and that is the biggest misconception. There's a huge population out there that has a need for this type of investment, for this type of morality and ethics, and this type of feel-good, because there's a real large feel-good factor about this. Besides, and don't get me wrong, you make returns here. It's not about not making returns. We talk no interest, but not no profit. But, and that is, I think, the main thing, the main error here. It's not pure charity. There is a part of charity in it, but it's not pure charity. And so we need to really try and rebrand and market Islamic finance as an ethical form of investment. And it satisfies both SDG, ESG, and Muslim Sharia requirements. It's just a combination of the two. It satisfies humanitarian requirements, especially through zakat and waqf, where you redistribute and you have the non-self-interest type of investment that you need. And this is really a great thing. If I have a product like this, I have a great marketing arena here to go out and do that. But people need to understand it. We need to put ourselves behind it. We also need to break down our fears. I often talk to Islamic banks, etc., and say, come to Europe. There's a large population. We don't know Europe. Break it down. There is a large need. Let's make it more popular, etc. Then the other thing is, stop trying to just do what conventional finance does. Stop trying to take the same, give it another name, restructure it a bit. No, innovate, develop new things, make yourself fill a niche that is today not filled. Then, in terms of liquidity maturity, that's really about a kind of cultural re-education of the investors. Today, the general problem, if I may, is that people that invest in Islamic finance have a 5-year holding period horizon. They hold to maturity. And the sukuk disappears somewhere under the mattress, and it's there for 5 years, and we go and take it. We need to get a secondary market going. And there are structures to be put in place, like Dr. Ahmed, you mentioned before, that we can put in place to make this liquid. Then one of the problems also is, if you look at why is conventional finance so successful, because it has a legal, tax, contractual infrastructure that is standardized. We don't find that today in Islamic finance. Today in Islamic finance, if I can be cynical, in the morning I devise a product that will be different than the one in the afternoon, satisfying the same needs, because, my Sharia scholar woke up with a different opinion in the morning than in the afternoon. Sorry, this is very, and it's very controversial, but that's a kind of an exaggerated impression in some ways. So we need to get to some standardization. Malaysia has been one of the countries that was at the forefront of this. I'm sure you can improve on that, but that's a direction in which you need to go, where you get a kind of ISDA for Islamic finance. So a standardized, exception-based, if you stick to these and you don't make exceptions, you're fine. When you start making exceptions, that's when I need to go and see a scholar. That's when I need to go and get to approvals, and that's the same in conventional finance. If I don't stick to my ISDA agreements, I need to go and have lawyers. So it's the same thing. The other one, as I mentioned, is the governments. The governments need to encourage this, and the governments need to shy away. I'm coming from Luxembourg. Luxembourg is one of the only European countries that issued a sukuk. Yeah, but it was a sukuk to refinance some existing projects. So come on, let's try and find some things here that are new infrastructure investments that are financed through this, that really add to the economy rather than recycling something that was already in existence. And then finally, we're often facing, as we learned, economies that are spread out, that live in remote areas, that have different needs, and their digitalization can really help raising the attractiveness, the reach, and the inclusion, the financial inclusion of people in this world. And I think that is one of the things as well, is really push digitalization in this market where it's not exactly where it could be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Marco. And I apologize to the audience. I think we'll need to close the session because we need to move into the closing part of the conference. But again, I would like to thank all of the speakers, beginning with His Excellency Dr. Al-Muraiki, representing the Secretary General, and reminding us of the importance also of bridging the divide, including when we think about it, the role of Islamic finance between humanitarian and development action. And the other speakers. Indeed, we had in this panel, on this podium, representatives of the full range of actors from Durham University, from the private sector, Deloitte, from an international financial institution, and Dr. Al-Muraiki with his background in the government of Qatar. So please join me in a moment in thanking all of the speakers, and we will then move to the closing session. So I ask you please to stay in your seats, because we've been joined, I think, by His Excellency the Secretary General for the closing session. But in the meantime, please thank all of the speakers in this panel on the role of Islamic finance.